The $500 million lottery winner has been identified. Turn it up, Vanessa. I know that name.
Daddy, sit down. It's probably another man with the same name. The winner purchased the ticket at the gas station on Henderson Road.
Pause it.
You can't pause live news.
3 mornings before my name reached their television, I was still standing on their porch in the rain. The rain in Ballantyne doesn't fall so much as it settles, cold and patient, the kind that soaks through a jacket in about 10 minutes and reminds you exactly how much that jacket cost. Mine cost $41 at an outlet store 2 winters back. Navy blue, a little worn at the cuffs. I was wearing it the morning Regina Caldwell decided my marriage to her daughter was over. I want to tell this the way it happened, not the way it sounds when somebody else tells it. So I'll start here, on the porch, with the rain coming down on a house I helped pay the property taxes on for 5 years, and never once had my name on the deed. Regina stood in the doorway holding a black trash bag out toward me like she was handing me a verdict. "Take what fits in the bag," she said. "That's about the size of the life you offered her." Behind her, Harold stood with his arms folded, the way he stood at his own dealership when a customer wanted to talk him down on price. He didn't say anything yet. He was waiting to see how this played out before he decided which side of it he wanted to be remembered standing on. Troy had his phone up, recording. 24 years old, still figuring out what he wanted to be, and he'd apparently decided that what he wanted to be that morning was a man who filmed another man's humiliation for content. And Vanessa stood just inside the doorway in her pastel pink robe, arms crossed over her chest, hair still pulled back in the neat bun she always slept in so it wouldn't be a mess in the morning. She didn't look at me. She looked at a spot somewhere past my shoulder, out at the rain, like if she didn't make eye contact, then she wasn't really part of what was happening. I didn't reach for the bag. "Is this your voice?" I asked her. "Or theirs?" She didn't answer right away. The rain filled the silence for her. "Maybe you should go for a few days," she finally said. That sentence did more damage than anything her mother said. Regina's cruelty I expected. I'd had 5 years to get used to it. But Vanessa's silence, dressed up as a suggestion, that was the sound of a marriage ending. Not with a scream, with a soft, reasonable voice telling me to leave for a few days, knowing full well nobody in that house intended for those few days to end. I picked up the duffel bag I'd already packed the night before because some part of me had known this was coming for a while. Navy duffel, same color as the jacket, same color as the cap sitting low on my head to keep the rain out of my eyes. Regina said something else on my way down the steps, something about how a woman can love a man and still outgrow him. I didn't turn around for it. I'd heard enough of her lines over the years to know she rehearsed them. I remember the rain on the back of my neck the whole walk down that driveway. I remember thinking, strangely, about the mortgage payment I'd helped cover the month before. The grocery runs, the small repairs around that house that Harold never noticed because noticing would have meant admitting I contributed to something. None of that mattered on the porch. In that house, contribution without a title didn't count as contribution at all. I made it to the end of the driveway before I heard the door open again behind me. "You forgot your uniform," Vanessa said. I turned around in time to see her throw my navy work jacket out into the rain. It landed in a puddle near the mailbox. Troy laughed, low, The way people laugh when they're relieved somebody else did the ugly thing so they didn't have to. The door closed. I stood there a second, rain running down the back of my neck, looking at that jacket lying in the water like something already discarded. Then I walked over, picked it up, shook it out, and put it back on, wet as it was, because it was still mine, and I wasn't going to leave it in a Caldwell family puddle. I had no idea what was folded up in the inside pocket. Neither did she. I walked the first half-mile with no plan at all, just the sound of my own boots on wet pavement and the duffel bag strap cutting into my shoulder. A neighbor, 2 houses down, was out walking her dog under an umbrella, and she looked at me the way people look at a man who clearly doesn't belong on that street anymore, soaked through, carrying everything he owns in one bag. I didn't blame her for the look. From where she stood, it probably did look like exactly what Regina wanted it to look like. A man being put out because he'd earned it. I called Renee from a gas station parking lot 2 miles from the house, sheltering under the overhang while the rain kept coming down sideways. "You okay?" she asked, and I could hear the worry underneath the question. The kind only a sister carries. "I will be," I told her, which wasn't quite a lie and wasn't quite the truth either. I didn't tell her about the trash bag. I didn't tell her about the jacket in the puddle. Some humiliations you protect the people you love from, at least until you've made peace with them yourself. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how I got measured in that house for 5 years running. I'm Malcolm Hayes, 38 years old. I worked, I should say now, though that part comes later, as a night shift dispatcher for a regional warehouse outside Charlotte, and I picked up delivery routes on the side when the hours lined up. It's steady work. It's not glamorous work. I met Vanessa at a credit union training seminar 8 years ago, back when she was still building her book of business as a mortgage loan officer, and I was still building mine as a man trying to keep his mother's medical debt from swallowing what was left of the family. We had that same discipline in common, at least at first. She used to say she liked that I didn't need to perform for a room. I used to say I liked that she noticed. Somewhere in those 8 years, her family's voice got louder in her head than my actual life did. Regina never said, "I don't approve of Malcolm," outright. She was too careful for that. What she said, over holiday dinners and Sunday phone calls, was things like, "A steady man can still be a small man." She said it with a smile, the kind of smile that lets a cruel sentence hide in plain sight at a dinner table. Harold measured me the way he measured every man who walked onto his dealership lot without a briefcase. He built Caldwell Luxury Motors from one used lot into 3 locations, and he wore that story like a medal. In his mind, a man who worked nights for somebody else's company hadn't built anything. Never mind that I was quietly paying down my late mother's medical debt every single month. Never mind that I was covering half my sister Renee's nursing school tuition so she wouldn't graduate drowning. Never mind that my credit was clean and my savings account had more discipline in it than most of Harold's showroom deals. None of that showed up on the surface, and surface was the only measurement Harold trusted. Troy just followed the current. If his father and grandmother laughed at the warehouse philosopher, Troy laughed louder, made TikToks about it, called it content. He was 24, still half-finished with a finance degree he talked about more than he studied for, and somewhere along the way he'd decided that mocking me was an easy way to look sharp in front of his mother and grandmother without having to actually build anything himself. There was a Thanksgiving, maybe 3 years back, when Troy stood up at the table and gave what he called a toast, but what was really a 5-minute joke at my expense about warehouse economics and delivery driver dividends. Everyone laughed except me and, for a moment, Vanessa, who caught my eye across the table with something that almost looked like an apology. Almost. She never said anything out loud. She let the moment pass the way she let all of them pass, hoping silence would count as neutrality. It never does. Silence in a room like that always sides with whoever's already loudest. And Vanessa. Vanessa didn't attack me outright. She did something slower. She stopped correcting the room. When Regina made a comment about steady versus successful, Vanessa used to say, "Mama, stop." By year 4, she'd started laughing along. A little late, a little uncomfortable, but laughing. She was embarrassed by the Navy cap. Embarrassed by the 8-year-old car I drove because I didn't believe in a car payment bigger than my rent used to be. Embarrassed that I sent money to my sister instead of putting it toward a bigger house we didn't need. She never said the word embarrassed. She didn't have to. I could read it in the way she'd angle her body away from me at her father's dinner table, like she was hoping the room would forget we walked in together. That's the part people don't understand about a slow ending. Nobody threw a plate. Nobody had an affair. She just let other people write a smaller and smaller story about who I was, one dinner at a time, until the morning she believed it enough to hand me a trash bag through a doorway and call it a suggestion. The morning it happened, before any of it happened, I stopped at the Henderson Road gas station like I did most mornings. Earl Jenkins owns the place. 68 years old, been standing behind that same counter since before I was born, probably. "Same coffee, Navy cap?" he said, like he said most mornings. "Same coffee, Earl." I had $4 and some change left in my wallet that week, which tells you something about where things stood between me and Vanessa's family long before the porch. Money was tight because I was still finishing off Mama's last medical bill and covering Renee's textbooks, and because Vanessa and I hadn't been splitting things evenly in a long while. She'd started keeping her income separate. For stability, she said. I didn't argue. I should have. I didn't. I paid for my coffee, and because the jackpot sign behind the counter said $500 million in big red numbers, and because some part of me, not hope exactly, something quieter than hope, needed to do one small thing that morning that wasn't about anybody else's approval, I bought a $3 ticket. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't because I believed I'd win. It was because I needed proof, even a small, useless kind of proof, that I was still allowed to want something for myself. That morning, before I even knew what was coming on the porch, I already felt like a man running out of permission to hope. Earl handed me the ticket and the receipt. I folded both and slid them into the inside pocket of my Navy jacket, the same pocket where I kept things I didn't want crushed in my back pocket. Then I drove home to a house that would put me out in the rain 3 hours later. I didn't think about that ticket again until the second night in a motel room off the interstate. The Roadway Inn off Exit 14 rents rooms by the night for $59, and the air conditioner rattles like it's fighting something inside the wall. I checked in soaking wet, hung the Navy jacket over the back of a chair to dry, and called Renee. I didn't tell her everything. I told her Vanessa and I were having a hard stretch, and I needed a few nights somewhere quiet. Renee's smart. She didn't push. She just said, "You know you can come stay with me." And I told her I'd figure it out, because some pride made me want to handle it alone first. The room had one lamp that worked, a bedspread the color of old coffee, and a window unit that clicked on and off like it was arguing with itself about whether to keep working. I sat on the edge of the bed that first night and did the thing men do when they don't want to feel what they're actually feeling. I made lists. How much I had left in checking. How many more nights I could afford at $59 a night. Whether I should call in for my next shift or take the week to figure things out. Lists are easier than grief. They give you somewhere to put your hands. I ate a sandwich from a gas station cooler. I listened to the rain against the window. I did not check the ticket. Somewhere around midnight, I let myself think about Vanessa for the first time without anger attached to it. I thought about the woman who used to bring me coffee at the warehouse gate at the end of a night shift, back before her family's voice got louder than her own memory of who I was to her. I wondered when exactly that woman had gone quiet, and whether she even noticed the day it happened. That's the part people find hard to believe looking back. A man carrying a $500 million ticket in his jacket pocket, and he doesn't even think to check it for a full day. But I wasn't thinking about numbers on a slip of paper. I was replaying a woman's voice telling me to go for a few days, and a mother-in-law's hand holding out a trash bag, and trying to figure out at what exact point in 5 years I'd stopped being seen as a husband and started being seen as a problem, waiting for a better solution to come along. The second night, I needed to know exactly how much money I had left to my name, because a man needs a number to hold on to when everything else has gone soft under him. I emptied my jacket pockets onto the motel bed to count it out. The receipt fell out first, then the ticket. I sat on the edge of that bed and looked at it for a long moment before I even reached for my phone. I checked the numbers once, then I checked them again, then a third time, because a man doesn't trust a miracle on the first look, not after the week I'd had. I didn't shout. I didn't call anybody. I sat on the floor of that motel room with my back against the bed frame and said the only thing that felt true in that moment. "Mama, I wish you could see this." I didn't go looking for the flashiest lawyer in Charlotte. I went looking for the right one. I found Denise Parker's website at 2 in the morning, and the line that stopped my scrolling was simple. I protect sudden wealth from sudden people. I called her office first thing, and she saw me that same afternoon, in a plain office with law books that looked like they'd actually been read. She looked at the ticket, looked at me, and set it down carefully on her desk like it was something alive. "Do not sign the back of this yet," she said. "Do not tell your wife. Do not answer family calls once your name becomes public, and it will become public in this state. Money this large doesn't arrive alone, Mr. Hayes. It arrives with everyone you've ever known standing behind it." I asked her what she meant. "I mean people you haven't spoken to in 10 years will remember they always believed in you," she said. "I mean family will rediscover feelings they misplaced. My job is to make sure the only people standing in front of that money when it lands are the ones who have a right to be there." She asked me questions I hadn't thought to ask myself yet. Who currently has access to my accounts? Whether my marriage was legally still intact, since North Carolina law would treat winnings differently depending on the timing and the separation. Whether anyone besides Earl and Renee knew the ticket existed. I answered honestly on all of it, and she nodded like a woman confirming a diagnosis she'd already suspected.
The separation happening before the claim works in your favor, she said. But it will not stop people from trying. Expect calls. Expect visits. Expect people to remember a version of your marriage that's kinder to them than the one you actually lived. We spent that week setting up a trust and a small holding company.
Denise walked me through it slow, patient, like she'd done this with other men who'd had the ground shift under them without warning. Your name may reach the news before your heart is ready, she warned me near the end of it. My heart was already dragged through the rain, I told her. It can survive the news, too. The claim process took its own time, the way government processes do, and by the time the state confirmed everything and the local station picked up the story, 3 days had passed since the porch. I wasn't there for what happened in that living room. I only know what came out later, in pieces, from Vanessa, from Troy, from the footage itself. But I know it well enough now to tell it the way I understand it happened. Harold was the one who caught the report first, sitting in his recliner with a glass of wine he'd poured himself after a long day trying to keep the dealership's numbers from sliding further than they already had. "Turn it up, Vanessa." I know that name. That's how the anchor's report reached them. Gas station on Henderson Road, 3 days ago. Navy blue baseball cap on the surveillance footage. My name rolling across the bottom of the screen in white letters. Regina tried the only defense she had left in the moment. "Could be another Malcolm," she said. Then the anchor added the detail that made it impossible to argue. Mr. Hayes was recently separated from his wife. Vanessa sat down like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her up. Troy, from what I understand, went quiet in a different way. He pulled out his own phone and realized the video he'd filmed on the porch 3 days earlier, the one of me holding a trash bag in the rain, was still sitting right there in his camera roll, time-stamped and undeniable. And somewhere in that room, Harold did the math out loud, the way a businessman does math when he's afraid. $500 million. Lump sum. After taxes. He said it like a man calculating how much air was left in a room he was trapped in. Regina said the only thing her pride had left to offer. Lucky is not the same as worthy. And Vanessa, for the first time in longer than I could remember, pushed back against her own mother in front of the family. "Then why do you look scared?" I wasn't in that room, but I've turned that question of hers over in my mind 100 times since, because it was the first sign that some part of her hadn't fully surrendered to the family script. Later, Vanessa told me what happened in the minutes after the anchor moved on to the weather. Harold sat back down slowly, like his knees had made the decision for him. Regina picked up the wine he'd spilled with a napkin, dabbing at the coffee table like the stain was the most urgent problem in the room. Troy kept refreshing his phone, watching the stories spread across local pages faster than he could keep up with, his own porch video sitting in his camera roll like a loaded gun he'd forgotten he was holding. Nobody in that room said my name out loud for almost a full minute after the broadcast moved past the story. Vanessa said the silence felt heavier than anything anyone could have said. Denise had told me to keep my phone off until the claim was fully processed and protected inside the trust. When I finally turned it back on, 3 days after the news broke, I found 89 missed calls waiting for me. Vanessa, Regina, Harold, Troy. A handful of unknown numbers that turned out to be local reporters. 2 numbers I recognized from Vanessa's side of the family, that hadn't called me once in 5 years of marriage. I didn't return a single one that day. The only call I made was to Earl Jenkins. "People been coming around asking about you," he said before I could even get my question out. "What'd you tell them?" "Told them coffee tastes better when you mind your business," Earl said. "Tabloid fella offered me money for the footage before the station even ran it official. I told him no. Wasn't mine to sell." I sat with that for a second. The fact that a man who owed me nothing had protected me when people who'd shared my last name by marriage were blowing up my phone trying to get in front of a number. A few weeks later, once the trust was funded and Denise had things structured the way she wanted, I quietly paid off the remaining balance on Earl's gas station loan through a small foundation we'd set up. No announcement, no plaque on the wall. I didn't do it to be thanked. I did it because loyalty like that deserves an answer, even a silent one. Earl found out anyway, the way small towns and small business owners always find out. He called me up, gruff as ever, and told me I didn't need to do that. I told him I knew I didn't need to. That wasn't the point. The point was that in a month full of people trying to get close to me because of a number, one man had stayed exactly the same distance away, minding his own business and mine. And that kind of steadiness deserved more than a thank you card. People who go through something like this sometimes want to buy the biggest house they can find and drive it past everybody who ever doubted them. I understood the impulse. I didn't act on it. What I bought instead was a modest penthouse condo downtown. Nothing gaudy, but with one window in the living room that happened to look straight down on Caldwell Luxury Motors. Denise asked me straight out, "Is this revenge?" "No," I told her. "It's a reminder, for me, not for them." I meant that. I didn't buy that window to gloat over Harold's lot every morning. I bought it because for 5 years I'd let a family look down on me from a position they'd built on borrowed pride. And I wanted, just for myself, to know what it felt like to look at that same building from somewhere they couldn't reach. One morning, a local reporter doing a follow-up piece caught a shot of me on my balcony, navy cap on, coffee in hand. It ran on the noon broadcast. Vanessa saw it. I know because Troy, trying to get a joke out of the moment, reposted the clip with some mocking caption about the man in the cap living large now. What Troy didn't count on was the internet doing what the internet does. Somebody found his older video, the one from the porch, the one with Regina holding out the trash bag and saying, "That's about the size of the life you offered her." It started circulating next to the balcony clip, side by side, and the story flipped in the comments section faster than Troy could delete anything. People weren't laughing at me anymore. They were furious at his family. I didn't feed that fire. I never posted anything, never gave an interview, never confirmed or denied a single detail floating around online. Denise had warned me early that the story would eventually try to right itself, with or without my help, and the smartest thing I could do was let it, as long as the truth in it stayed intact. It did. The video didn't need my commentary. The trash bag spoke for itself. Troy showed up at my building a few days after that, angry and a little unraveled. The kind of angry that's mostly embarrassment wearing a louder outfit. "You made us look bad," he said in the lobby, loud enough that the doorman glanced over. "I didn't upload the first video," I said. "You did." He didn't have an answer for that, so he tried a different approach. asking if I could help him fix his online reputation, meaning he wanted money to make the internet forget what his own camera had recorded. I told him no, but I gave him something else, because underneath the arrogance, he was still 24 and still figuring out which direction to point his life. Learn the difference between finance and value, I told him. You've been studying one and mistaking it for the other. He left without a comeback. I don't know if it landed. Some seeds you plant without knowing if the ground's ready. Harold didn't come to my building. He went to Denise's office instead, dressed the way he dressed for a big sale, navy suit of his own, a folder under his arm like a man walking into a pitch meeting instead of a family reckoning. I agreed to hear him out, mostly out of curiosity about what version of himself he'd bring. This could benefit both of us, he said, sliding the folder across the table. Some proposal about an investment in the dealership. I set my navy cap down on the table between us before I answered. 3 days ago, I said, you told me I'd never build anything. Now you want me to save what you built? Harold didn't have a script ready for that. The businessman posture cracked just slightly, and underneath it, I saw something closer to fear. Eventually, he admitted it outright. The dealership was close to default. He'd hidden it from Regina and from Vanessa both, because admitting the numbers were bad would have meant admitting the whole image he'd built his family's pride around was thinner than it looked. I told him plainly, I won't invest in a business that teaches sons to laugh at men standing in the rain. I didn't slam the door on it completely, but I wasn't handing him a rescue either. Not yet. Not on his terms. Regina came to see me a week later, and she didn't come with an apology. She came with logic, the kind she'd always been good at dressing up as reason. We are family, she said, sitting across from me in Denise's conference room, like she still had home field advantage. Family doesn't humiliate each other publicly. Then why did I leave with a trash bag? I asked her. She tried a different angle, saying that money didn't make me worthy of her daughter. You're right, I told her. The money didn't. But neither did being poor make me unworthy. You just never separated the two. She tried once more, saying maybe getting kicked out was what finally pushed me to become something. That's when I laid the gas station receipt on the table in front of her. The one with the date and time stamped clean across the top, proving the ticket had been purchased that same morning, before I'd ever set foot back on that porch. Before the trash bag, before any of it. You didn't push me into a blessing, I said. You just removed yourself right before it arrived. Regina looked at that receipt a long time. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't have a next line ready. She left without another word, and I watched her walk to her car through the office window, spine straight, chin level, still performing composure for an audience that, for once, wasn't watching. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment. Not triumph. Something closer to sadness. For a woman who'd spent so many years building a story about worth that a single gas station receipt could take apart in under a minute. Vanessa found me at the motel. Not the condo, the roadway inn off exit 14, the room where I'd first counted my last dollars, the room where a jacket had hung over the back of a chair to dry 3 nights before everything changed. She came in a soft pink blouse, not polished the way I was used to seeing her, a few strands loose from the bun she always kept so tight and controlled. "I came here," she said, "because this is where I should have come 3 days ago." I didn't soften right away. I wasn't ready to. "Did you come because you lost me?" I asked her. "Or because everyone knows you threw away a rich man?" She sat with that question longer than I expected. I let the silence hold. Some things need room to be answered honestly instead of quickly. "I didn't throw away a rich man," she finally said. "I threw away a good one. The money just made it impossible to lie about that anymore." It was the truest thing she'd said to me in longer than I could remember. Still, I wasn't handing her an easy door back in. "An apology can open a door," I told her. "It can't rebuild a house by itself." She nodded, and for once, she didn't try to argue her way into more than what I'd offered. We sat in that motel room a while longer, not saying much, listening to the same window unit that had rattled through my first night there weeks earlier. Before she left, she looked at the navy jacket, the very one still hanging over the back of that same chair where I'd left it to dry. "I never checked the pockets," she said quietly. "Not once. Not that morning, not after." "I know," I said. "Neither did I, until I had no choice left but to." Harold organized an event to save the dealership, some combination of investment pitch and public relations exercise. Regina, from what I understand, saw it as a chance to stage a family reconciliation in front of local cameras that were still hungry for the follow-up to my story. I went. Navy suit, nothing flashy, my cap left at home for that one. Vanessa was there in a pastel pink blazer, her hair back in that same neat bun, though something in her posture had changed since the motel. Less performance, more waiting to see what was actually true. Regina tried to embrace me in front of the cameras like the last month hadn't happened. I stepped back before she could finish the gesture. I wasn't there to be her prop. A reporter in the crowd, one who'd clearly done her homework, pulled up an old clip on her phone and played it loud enough for the room. Troy's video. Me in the rain. The trash bag. Regina's voice saying, "Take what fits in the bag. That's about the size of the life you offered her." The room went quiet, in the way a room goes quiet when it hears something it can't unhear. Harold looked at the floor. Vanessa's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. Regina tried to say the clip was missing context. "Context," I said, loud enough for the room, "is what people ask for when the picture tells too much truth." I made my decision in front of that whole room, because some things need to happen in daylight to mean anything. I would not invest in Caldwell Luxury Motors the way Harold wanted, propping up his name on the sign and his control over the books. But I wasn't going to let the people who worked there lose their jobs over a family's pride. Through the trust, I bought the outstanding debt directly. The dealership would move to an employee ownership transition, jobs protected. But Harold's hand on the financial controls would be lifted. Harold had a choice: accept it or lose the whole thing and every job attached to it. I watched him work through the math on his face the same way he'd worked through the jackpot number in his living room 3 weeks earlier. This time, the math wasn't in his favor, and he knew it. He accepted. I want to be clear about something here, because it matters to me more than the money itself. I didn't do that to punish innocent people who happened to work for a man I had every reason to resent. I did it because protecting people who had nothing to do with how I got treated on that porch was the only kind of justice I was interested in carrying forward. I thought about the mechanics who'd worked on that lot for 15 years, the front desk staff who had kids in community college, the finance manager who'd once quietly slipped me a business card for a used truck when I couldn't afford new. No judgment in his voice at all. None of them had stood on that porch. None of them deserved to lose a paycheck over a family's pride finally catching up with them. Regina turned to Vanessa in that room and told her, in front of everyone, that she needed to stand with her family. "I did," Vanessa said. "That was the mistake." She stepped toward me, not to reclaim anything, not to angle for money or forgiveness, but to say something out loud that she'd clearly been carrying since the motel. "My husband was not less when he was poor," she said, loud enough for the cameras still rolling. "We were less when we treated him like he was." I won't pretend that sentence didn't move me. It did. But moving me wasn't the same as resolving everything between us, and I told her that plainly, later, away from the cameras. "I believe you're sorry," I said. "I don't know yet if I can trust the woman who needed a lottery ticket to see me." We didn't have a movie ending that day. No embrace, no reunion for the cameras to catch. We agreed instead to take real-time, separate-for-now counseling if she wanted it. No promises rushed just because the story had an audience waiting for a bow on top of it. I kept my dignity, and I let her keep the work of earning something back, if that's even where we end up. 6 months later, I opened my own company, Hayes Route and Relief Logistics, a small operation built to move supplies for food banks, shelters, and small businesses that never make the news the way lottery winners do. The Navy cap sits framed on the wall of my office now, not as a trophy for the money, but as a reminder of the man I already was before any of this happened. People laughed at that cap when it was on my head in the rain. They froze when it showed up on the news. I still stop by Henderson Road sometimes. Earl still asks, "Same coffee, Navy cap?" And I still say yes, because some things are worth keeping exactly as they were. A few weeks ago, driving past that same gas station on a rainy morning, I saw a man standing next to a car that had stalled out, soaked through, waving people around him for help that wasn't coming. I pulled over, walked out in the rain, and handed him a spare Navy umbrella I kept in my trunk. I didn't say anything about who I was. I didn't need him to know the story. I just needed him to get out of the rain a little drier than I once did. Renee comes by the office some Fridays, still finishing her last year of nursing school, still refusing to let me cover more of her tuition than she considers fair, which tells you she inherited more of Mama's stubbornness than either of us likes to admit. Denise still handles the trust, and she still calls twice a year just to check that no one new has shown up asking for a piece of something they never helped build. Vanessa and I talk sometimes, not often, not easily, but honestly, which is more than we managed in the last 2 years we lived under the same roof. She started her own consulting practice, away from her father's dealership, away from her mother's dinner table opinions. I don't know if there's a future for us. I've stopped needing to know that answer before I can keep living my life. Some doors you leave unlocked without deciding yet whether you'll walk back through them. Some people only recognize your value when a number appears beside your name. Don't wait for that number. Know who you are before the world catches up. So let me ask you the same question I've been asking myself since that morning on the porch. Have you ever been treated like you weren't enough, only for life to prove otherwise? If someone in your life only saw your value after your circumstances changed, this story was for you. A year passed before I let myself think of that morning on the porch as something closed instead of something still bleeding. Hayes Root and Relief Logistics had grown past the 2 trucks I started with. We had 11 now, and a small warehouse off the same stretch of road where I used to work night shifts for somebody else's company. I liked driving past that old warehouse sometimes, not out of pride, just to remind myself where the discipline came from. The money didn't build that discipline. 5 years of quiet mornings and unpaid attention did. Renee graduated that spring. I sat in the 3rd row at her pinning ceremony. Navy tie loosened by the time the speeches ran long, and when they called her name, I clapped louder than I meant to. Mama should have been there. I said that to Renee afterward, and she just nodded. Because some grief doesn't need more words added to it. Earl retired from the gas station that same year. Sold the place to his nephew, who kept the same coffee machine, and out of some stubborn respect for the old man, kept the Navy cap joke going too. First time I stopped by after the sale, the nephew looked up and said, without missing a beat, "Same coffee? Navy cap?" I laughed for the first time in a long while. The real kind, not the polite kind. Caldwell Luxury Motors made it through its transition. The employees who'd stayed on told me, in their own quiet ways, that the place felt different once Harold's hand came off the financial controls. Not worse, just honest. Numbers on the wall instead of numbers hidden in a drawer. Harold and I never became friends. I didn't expect us to. But we ran into each other at a supplier event that fall, both of us a little older round the eyes, and he shook my hand without a folder under his arm this time, without a pitch behind it. "You didn't have to save it," he said. "I didn't save it for you," I told him. "I saved it for the people who never got a say in how you treated me." He nodded slow, like a man finally hearing a sentence he'd had coming for years. That was the whole conversation. It didn't need to be longer than that. Regina I haven't spoken to since that room. I heard through Vanessa that she moved her church board work to a different congregation, one where fewer people knew the story well enough to ask about it in the parking lot after service. I don't wish her harm. I just don't reach for a woman who spent 5 years measuring me by a jacket instead of a heart. Troy, of all of them, surprised me the most. He finished his finance degree that winter, quietly, no video about it. He reached out once, not for money, just to say he'd started an internship at a small firm that did real community investment work, the kind that doesn't trend online. I told him that was worth more than any dealership sign with his name on it ever would be. He didn't argue. Vanessa and I signed our divorce papers in the spring, in a lawyer's office that wasn't Denise's. Both of us calm, both of us finally speaking in our own voices instead of borrowed ones. Before she left the office that day, she said something I've held on to since. "I used to think the size of a house told you the size of a man," she said. "You taught me it doesn't. I just learned it too late to keep you." I didn't tell her it was okay. It wasn't, not fully, not yet. But I told her I was glad she finally said it out loud, in her own words, with nobody's approval attached to it. We didn't hug. We didn't promise to stay close. We shook hands, like two people who'd built something real once and were finally honest enough to let it rest. Rain came back to Charlotte that April, the same steady, patient kind that started this whole story. I drove past Henderson Road on my way to check on a new delivery route. Navy cap on, coffee in the cup holder. A woman was standing under the gas station overhang, phone to her ear, voice tight with the kind of stress that comes from a car that won't start and a day that won't slow down for her. I didn't know her. She didn't know me. I still had a spare umbrella in the truck, navy, same as always, and I walked it over without making a thing of it. She thanked me, said she didn't know people still did that for strangers. I told her some of us learn the hard way how much a small kindness can matter when nobody around you is offering one. I drove off before she could ask my name. She didn't need it. The story was never really about my name rolling across the bottom of a television screen. It was about what a person does with a fortune, and what a person does without one, and how those two answers, if you're paying attention, usually turn out to be the same answer. Some people only recognize your value when a number appears beside your name. I hope you don't wait for that number. Tell me in the comments, has life ever proven someone wrong about you long after they stopped waiting to find out?